one thing I wanted you to keep in mind, one thing is, if you look at the economic data and assume nothing changed in Washington from 2014, 15, 16, and 17, and looked at the numbers, assuming nothing changed would have been correct, because you cannot detect in any of the economic series, month by month, quarter by quarter, that anything has happened in Washington. So from that, you could conclude as maybe Washington, in the financial markets, it may have shown up some things, but you may conclude as that Washington is irrelevant because the economy just continues to chug along despite all the headlines coming out of Washington. The economy just continues to chug along as if nothing, and I mean as if nothing is going on in Washington, D.C. And Jerry's amazed by it, I'm amazed by it, and we thought there would be huge fiscal stimulus. Hasn't come yet, maybe it will come, but the economy just chugs along at this 2% kind of pace. Unemployment drops and employment gradually increases. And so it's sort of irrelevant. It's as if the real economy is just totally tuned out whatever is going on in Washington, D.C., which is probably a good thing. So this is my first slide on Washington chaos. And there's the president say, just fix it. There's a leaky debt ceiling. There's issues. It's Irma. It's Harvey. And all of that. Nothing's getting fixed, but the economy chugs along. And then the other one is here. This is the GOP talking to the president. I missed the chapter where you give up all of your leverage and take Nancy Pelosi's first offer. So that was the deal that was made. So we don't have to worry about a debt ceiling issue, government shutdown issue. That was supposed to happen in September. Officially in the law, it looks like December, but really the way they handled a whole bunch of loopholes in the thing, this won't happen until March. The government doesn't run out of money until March. So that's been put off for 6 months. So no one, the Democrats thought they were going to hold the Trump people hostage in December to shut down the government over the holiday season. That's not going to happen. There's plenty of money to keep the government running until March. So no one's talking about that anymore. All right, next, the theme is the economy just chugs along. It'll be 2.5 to 3. It'll be a little bit better than 2 near term. Consumption, capital spending, and housing will sort of be okay. Unemployment is going to bottom at around 4%. We're going to get fiscal stimulus from Washington, and I'll get into that. Some of that fiscal stimulus will be just hurricane relief. Everybody's been waiting for a big infrastructure program. Well, we're going to have a big infrastructure program in Houston, and we're going to have a big infrastructure program in Florida. And God knows, and I literally mean God knows what's going to happen in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico has no electricity, no water for 3.5 million people, and nothing, very little is going on. And that's not in the U.S. economic data, because it's a territory. It's not technically part of the U.S. that way, but that's a monster issue. We have wages and inflation going up, and we think the Fed's going to continue on a normalization path. And also today, the administration announced, instead of having a 1-page tax reform program, they have a 9-page thing. None of that is legislation. I'll talk about that in a little bit on what kind of tax cut they're talking about. And my guess is we will get a tax cut, because the Republicans haven't really been able to do anything that they really promised. And one thing I think Trump understands, and the Republican leadership in both houses, they understand that Republicans are put on this earth to cut taxes, and they'll probably do something on the tax side. Okay, this is our GDP forecast. It's down in the current quarter compared to the second quarter. That's largely due to the storms in Texas and in Florida, and then it begins to pick up, and we get some 3% growth numbers in the beginning of next year. That's assuming a tax cut takes effect in the first quarter. That may be heroic, because there's only about 45 legislative days between now and the end of the year, and they don't have a bill yet in legislative language. Okay. Next is see, here's the chart. Here's employment. Where's the election? Can't find it. Employment just continues to chug along, and it slows down in 2019 into 2018, 2019. Why? We're running out of workers. So that's it's more a supply issue. It is not a demand issue. The other thing that's going on, even with employment chugging along, and William is going to talk about this a lot. See over here, retail employment's down year over year. It's down about 30,000. Retail employment only goes down on a year-over-year basis starting a recession or in a recession. It's down. And the other thing is if you take out the e-commerce, because e-commerce is up 30,000, which is in the retail employment, so retail employment is really down in stores, down 60,000. So this is a big drop where it normally generates 100 to 200,000 jobs year over year. It's now negative 30,000 on all in or 60,000 on in stores. And we're still getting very good employment growth overall, absent any help from retail. In fact, retail is hurting. Here's the unemployment rate. We have it bottoming at 4%. We have it rising in 2019 because we think the economy slows somewhat at the end of 2019. 2019 is a long way away, but we just want to highlight, although there's no real recession risk, we don't think in 2018. 2019 is a long way off, and you can make up whatever you want. So we sort of highlight is we have a small increase in the unemployment rate at the end of 2019. All right, fiscal policy. We're going to have a huge tropical storm rebuilding. It looks like it's going to be $200 billion, and that's not counting Puerto Rico. That's just Florida and Houston. And the other thing is FEMA money is really going to flow this time, unlike Katrina 12 years ago, because FEMA is taking applications via smartphone. So you could shop with smartphone. FEMA will do your application with a smartphone, and you get up to 30 grand from FEMA if you're really wiped out. There's a real issue in Houston because most people did not have flood insurance. To give you a sense of what the Houston flood meant, is just picture an earthquake, 7.2 earthquake in Century City. In the Los Angeles area, what that would mean, that's the floods from the storm in Houston. That's the rough equivalent of what happened. And there's no, most people don't have flood insurance, but most people have car insurance, and the 500,000 cars were lost in Houston. Our guess is 300,000 will be new cars replaced and 200,000 will be used cars. There's a lot of used cars. So used cars will move to Texas. People buy used cars, or we'll get a rebound in auto production, probably starting in the fourth quarter, first quarter. So auto production will be a little bit better. But make no mistake, even though GDP is showing it's better, lots of wealth was destroyed. So this is not the right way. It's not the good way to get GDP growth, but it's going to show up in the numbers as more economic activity, more GDP growth, more employment, and probably higher wages. We have a 1.8 trillion tax cut in our numbers. The administration is talking 1.5 trillion. We'll see what happens. Normally, when you have compromises, the number goes up to solve problems rather than the number going down. The big issue here locally for the tax cut is they're talking about eliminating the deduction for state and local income taxes as a way for cutting rates. So for a lot of folks, it may end up paying more taxes rather than less taxes. But from the point of view of the Republican Party, this is a tax on blue states by doing away with that, because that's where most of those are the high tax states. We think also is going to be a big increase in defense spending, and that's one change that will show up in the chart. And the recent defense authorization bill that passed the Senate was much more than the numbers we have in our forecast right now. So a huge increase in defense spending is coming, and a lot of this stuff is long lead items, so this will flow through in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. That is coming. That will be good locally here. And then we also think we may get an infrastructure program on top of the storm relief, and I think that will be a way of funneling extra money into Houston and into Florida, where it really is desperately needed. Here's defense spending. 6 years in a row of decline in real defense spending. This year we have a modest increase, and then we have a substantial increase in 18, a little less in 19. It might be reversed. You may have more in 19 rather than in 18, something like that. But defense spending is going up, and all you have to do is pick up the paper and see what's going on with North Korea. Anti-missile defense is very expensive. That's all I have to say. All right, federal deficit goes up, but we have it dropping in 2018. And why does it drop? Is part of the tax bill will include a special tax on the repatriation of foreign earnings earned by American corporation that has never been taxed in the United States. They bring it home, it's taxed at a maximum of 35%. It's really the delta between the local tax rates, say in Europe or in tax havens. So instead of paying, so a U.S. corporation would pay 12% in Ireland. If they bring the money home, they'd owe the 23% tax, the difference between the 35% and the 12%. Our guess is that they'll probably have a repatriation tax on the order of 8% or 10% to get American companies to bring the money back home, and that'll raise $80 billion to $100 billion, and that lowers the deficit in the year that occurs. It'll be a one-year get out of jail, sort of get out of jail, not quite free, but almost free for that. So that actually will lower the deficit. In 2018, it'll be a one-shot thing, and then it starts going back up again in 2019. Consumption is growing moderately. It's just under 3%. The uptick in 18 is largely due to automobiles. That's just to replace the cars that were lost in Texas. Housing is we have modest increases in housing through 2018, and then we have housing rolling over. And our thinking is if we haven't gotten a housing boom going with 4% mortgage rates and prices have continued to rise, it's going to be a lot hard to get anything going with 5% mortgage rates, which is where they'll be probably sometime in 18 or 19. And so we think housing starts begin to roll over in 2019. And we don't even get to the 1.4 million, where in the past we used to think we'd get to 1.4 million to 1.5 million. We don't think we're going to get there. Underlying demographic demand is about 1.4 million to 1.5 million. So we're still underproducing housing. So even though this chart looks good because it starts in 2008, so it looks good, but if you go back to 2005, you had 2 million starts. So we're still well below the old highs. Moderate gains in equipment spending. We had good news today on durable goods orders, so that seems to be following through. This decline over here, largely due to a big drop in oil and gas spending. Oil and gas spending has reversed. Oil's bottomed at $28 a barrel. It's now $50 a barrel. So that's part of the swing, and we'll have modest growth on the equipment side. May get a little bit more. We may be too pessimistic on this. And then the other thing is we've been forecasting forever getting to see 4% increases in wages and total compensation. It hasn't happened, but like a stop clock, we continue to forecast that. And we got at least some very strong anecdotal evidence 2 days ago. Target announced they were going to raise company-wide, nationwide, their target minimum wage, which is $10. They're going to raise that to $11 an hour. So it's a 10% raise for all the people at the lowest end at Target, 10% raise effective October. And they also said by 2020, they're going to $15 an hour. Major employer, 350, 400,000 employees. And trust me, they're not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They can't get people. They can't retain people. We're out of workers. So the thing is this is going to put also pressure on retail margins, as retailers are going to have to pay more for people. So Target announcing that, other companies are going to be doing that. So we think we may be on the cusp of seeing wage increases. Instead of the 2 to 3% kind of numbers, we may see 3 to 4% or even a little bit higher going forward. All right, now the other thing that's going on is we've also been forecasting increases in inflation for a while. We continue to do that, but even the Fed's we're admitting that most economists don't understand inflation anymore. Because the old way of looking at inflation is it's a monetary phenomenon. So we've been printing lots of money with all the QEs, QE 1, 2, and 3, no inflation. So monetarism doesn't explain it. Now, of course, if they want to do a field trip to Caracas, Venezuela, and study under the high school dropout, Mr. Nicolas Maduro, Nicolas will tell them how to get 800% inflation if they wanted, because he found the magic formula to do it. So ultimately, money works, but it takes a lot more than anybody thought. And the other thing is the Keynesian version of inflation is you have a Phillips curve. The lower unemployment goes, the higher inflation goes. That hasn't been working either. So the Fed scratches their head, we scratch our heads, and so I don't think there's a realistic understanding in the economics profession right now in the current environment is how does inflation work? And the answer is we don't know. And anybody says they really know, I don't think you have a theory to explain what is going on, except that you could say globalization, technology, and all of that, but you can't formally do it econometrically to prove it. But we think we're going to be over 2+% in 18 and in 19. And that leads the Federal Reserve to gradually increasing interest rates, which is the blue line. And the line through 2018 is consistent with the dot plots that the Federal Reserve puts out every quarter on their estimate of rate increases. So most of the members of the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee said they want to raise rates in December. So we have a rate increase in December. In 2018, most of them have 3 increases in the federal funds rate. We have 3 increases in 2018. Now, we did this before the dot plots came out, so we were lucky on that. We're a little bit more aggressive in 2019 because we have higher inflation than they do. So through 2018, what we're showing here and sort of what the markets are beginning to anticipate is that's what most people are looking for today. Of course, that could change tomorrow or the next day. And then we have an increase in long-term rates going up to around 4% in 2019 and then rolling over a little bit, because our sense is by the end of 2019, the economy will begin to start to slow a bit. Because remember, if you put in all this fiscal stimulus on a fully employed economy, you create inflation pressures, the Fed wants to raise rates more, we're out of workers, we get all kinds of late cycle behavior. So you could tell a story of some kind of issues at the end of 2019. If you want to tell a story about a recession at the end of 2019, you could tell the story. We're not forecasting it, but we're just sort of hinting at it in the forecast. And today, we were surprised, and most people were surprised with this drop in interest rates at the long end. That seems to be reversing because the 10-year is up a lot today. It's up 8 basis points today to 230. So maybe we're on track to get to 3 and then maybe to get to 4 on the long end. So that's sort of the forecast. It's sort of benign. It's very straightforward. The economy is good. It's not great. Employment growth is going to continue to be strong. We're going to chug along even with the weakness in retail. Storm relief, infrastructure, defense spending, tax cut. That's a lot of stimulus being thrown at the economy. So our guess is we could see 3% for a couple of quarters in the beginning of 2018. We got 3% in the second quarter. We could see 3% for a couple of quarters, and then it begins to trail off. Consumption, capital spending, and housing will grow moderately, and a higher inflation rate, very low unemployment, at least measured by the unemployment rate, keeps the Fed on some kind of path to normalize interest rates. And then along the way, they're unwinding the QE experiment, where basically instead of buying bonds, they're still going to basically selling bonds into the market. They sell the bonds when bonds come due at the Federal Reserve. They just let them come due, and they don't reinvest the proceeds. That's going to start out small and it's going to get bigger. And we're going to find out how this experiment works as they unwind 8 years of extraordinarily expansionary monetary policy. The Fed balance sheet went from $800 billion to over $4 trillion. It quintupled. Never ever happened like that before. And they're going to shrink that $4 trillion balance sheet down to something like $3 trillion. And we'll see what happens and how that works out. We're in uncharted waters. So you could make up whatever you want to do. You could say that you get much higher rates, or maybe it's been so telegraphed that everything will be straightforward and have the moderate rise we're forecasting. So that's the forecast. Thank you so much.